Morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Ariela Caglio. I'm a professor at Bocconi University in Milan, and I've been doing research and working on sustainability and SDGs for several years. And it's my pleasure and honor to moderate this high-level side event in the margins of the 2021 ECOSOC High-Level Political Forum. This event is titled Firms and the Sustainable Development Goals, Time to Design Industrial Policies for the SDGs, and is hosted by the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry of Japan, the Permanent Mission of Japan to the United Nations, the Permanent Mission of Costa Rica to the United Nations, and the Office of the Special Representative of the OECD to the United Nations. So my warm welcome to our distinguished speakers and panelists, and to all the participants who are connected from all over the world. First, I just wanted to go over a few things before we start with our keynote speakers. I would like to remind you that this is a Zoom webinar, and thus microphones and cameras are turned off for the time being. We are recording the meeting, and recording will be uploaded on the OECD Science, Technology and Innovation Director's website. We will have a Q&A session after the panel. And please remember, if you want to intervene, you should use the raise hand button and wait to be called upon to speak. Please hold all the questions until the Q&A portion of the event, which will be after the panelists have finished intervening. When called upon, the technical team will upgrade your participation status to allow you to share your camera and microphone. You can also write your questions, maybe the most technical ones, in the chat box to the host. And I will give priority to the question asked through the raise hand button. Apologies in advance, as I will need to be strict on the time, and will have to encourage speakers to respect the allocated time for each item if needed. Now, it's my pleasure to give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Kimura Tetsuya, Ambassador for Economic, Social and United Nations Management Affairs, Permanent Mission of Japan to the United Nations, for some introductory remarks.
Thank you, Professor Kagiro. Excellencies, distinguished participants, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. It's a great honor to speak at this side event. I would like to extend my heartfelt appreciation to OECD colleagues who led the efforts to organize this event together with Costa Rica. Last year, we entered a decade of action towards the achievement of the SDGs. COVID-19, however, has hit the world both economically and socially, and we need to redouble our efforts to build back better and achieve the SDGs. In this endeavor, Japan is determined to play a leading role, building upon the principle of human security. In fact, Japan has been providing foreign aid at an unprecedented speed for developing countries with vulnerable health and medical systems, aiming to achieve universal health coverage, UHC, throughout the international community under the principle of leaving no one's health behind. Furthermore, we need to bridge the funding gap to attain the SDGs, which is estimated at around $2.1 trillion per year, or even larger because of the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. In this regard, the mobilization of private sector resources is essential. Japan is accelerating ESG investment and promoting the mobilization of private sector resources by annually issuing about $550 million of JICA bonds as social bonds to achieve the SDGs. In addition, it is necessary to accurately trace the financial flows from all countries to developing countries, including funds from the private sector, in order to ensure the most effective use of limited funds. Japan supports OECD's efforts to improve the transparency of funding through the Total Official Support for Sustainable Development Initiative. On Thursday, Japan will present its second voluntary national review at the HLPF. In the review, we stress the importance of the participation of multi-stakeholders. In fact, we have made a lot of efforts to make the SDGs widely known among the public, such as giving out Japan SDGs Award and naming the SDGs Future Cities. As a result, the logo of the SDGs can now be seen everywhere in Japan, and many Japanese magazines are publishing SDGs features articles. However, to achieve the SDGs, we need further efforts to create an environment which is conducive to promoting the private sector's involvement. We fully support OECD's initiatives in this respect, and I believe today's topic of how industrial policy can foster the private sector's contributions to the SDGs is of critical importance. I have high hope that we will have a fruitful discussion today. I thank you.
Thanks a lot, Ambassador Kimura Tetsuya. Thank you for your intervention and for co-hosting this event. I would like now to give the floor to Mr. Yahagi Tomoyoshi, Director General for Trade Policy, Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, Japan, for a video message.
Good morning, everyone. I am Yahagi Tomoyoshi, Director General for Trade Policy at the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry of Japan. We appreciate co-hosting such a valuable event at the UN High-Level Political Forum. We are committed to achieving the SDGs by 2030. Japan has also supported the industrial policy for the SDGs project conducted by the OECD from 2020 to spring 2021. We greatly appreciate the work done by the OECD, which has produced important and comprehensive report on industrial policies for the SDGs in 7 countries and the EU. In relation to the report, I would like to mention 2 points. First, I hope that the OECD report, which is expected to be released in September, will be referred by many governments, and that it will be the base for discussions on policies towards the realization of better policies for better lives. The OECD policy note published today emphasizes the need to support SMEs, which could face more difficulties in adopting sustainable business models and to build an ecosystem for startups and entrepreneurs. In order to meet these needs, METI is implementing several initiatives. For example, we provide subsidies and network support for SMEs which work on development projects to address social issues in Africa, India, and other emerging countries. In addition, METI and JETRO also provide SMEs and startups with various tools to support their sustainable business abroad in order to improve the matching between Cs and Ds. Furthermore, we select promising startups, including companies related to SDGs, as J-Startup companies, and support them together with a public-private community as well as government assistance collectively. Second, to adhere to our commitment to the 2030 agenda as pointed out in the policy note by the OECD, Japan expressed the determination to achieve net zero by 2050 last October. In addition, at the Leaders' Summit on Climate in April, we declare our ambitious goals to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 46% from 2013 levels in 2030, and moreover, to continue attempting to reach the 15% level. Heading towards this new reduction target, we will steadily promote through energy saving and the use of non-fossil energy sources such as renewables. In advancing these efforts on global scale, Japan values a multilateral approach. In September 2019, we established the Cleaner Energy Future Initiatives for ASEAN countries called CEFIA, and have carried out public-private partnership project which aim to promote the energy transition and realize low-carbon society in the ASEAN region. Japan will contribute to pursue better industrial policies for promoting the business sector's commitment to the SDGs, and we will also contribute to the achievement of the SDGs on global scale in cooperation with other governments, international organizations, private sector, and civil society. Thank you for your kind attention.
Many thanks again to Mr. Yahagi Tomoyoshi for his video message. And thanks again to the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry Japan for co-hosting this event. It's now my pleasure to give the floor to Mr. Dirk Pilat, Deputy Director, Directorate for Science and Technology and Innovation, OECD, to present the results of a recently released policy note on industrial policy for the SDGs. We are really looking forward to your presentation that will kick off also the panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Caglio, and thank you also very much for the welcome we just received from Master Kimura, and looking very much forward to the discussion in a minute. I will share my screen just to give you a short presentation on some of the work that we've been doing at the OECD and on this topic. Basically to talk a little bit about some of the work to try and identify a little bit more how firms are contributing and can contribute to the Sustainable Development Goals, and the link to industrial policy that we've been trying to look at. Now, obviously, I think talking about the Sustainable Development Goals, it's probably not a bad thing to start with them. I think we all know them, but I will refer to some of them a little bit later. So which is why I thought it was not a bad idea to start with them again, even though I think everybody's familiar with them. Now we know that firms have a large potential to contribute to the Sustainable Development Goals, and we know that they will need to play an important role. We also know that we are still a while away from achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, and actually on the right hand of the screen you can see a little chart. Hard to see exactly all the Sustainable Development Goals, but the point here is really that on most of the Sustainable Development Goals we're still quite far away from where we need to be. So if we really want to achieve them, we need to be at the end of the circle. We see in many cases that, at least for OECD countries, we are still in many cases at the red lines, which means we are still far away from achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, particularly in certain areas. For instance, on number 14, which is linked to oceans and water, there's still a very large gap between where we need to be and where we currently are, at least in the OECD area. I do think we have some hopeful signs. We see that sustainability is increasingly considered a business opportunity. We see growing momentum, I think, in many firms to align activities more closely with sustainability, discussions on corporate social responsibility, ESG, impact investment, green finance. Also, I think increasingly a move from consumers to basically show we need to have more sustainable firms. We need to be more focused on that, and the impact of firms' activities is becoming more important. However, there is still a way to go, and even though firms have a potential to address a wide range of the SDGs, they also face obstacles, which means there is room for policy to come into this area. So the first thing we tried to do in this policy note is to really look a little bit at trying to understand a little bit better and tracking the firm's contribution to the Sustainable Development Goals. And I don't want to go into too much detail. You can read how we try to do this in the report in more detail when it comes out. It is summarized a little bit in the policy note that accompanies it. We try to basically look at examples from firms' actions in different industries, looking and using survey data from the UN Global Compact, and then also using artificial intelligence, or basically machine learning, to identify the Sustainable Development Goals in short text. So basically we had an algorithm that helped to look at business actions in different areas. And you see a little example here where you have a firm that basically is developing a new shower head that basically will use less water than regular showers. And of course, if you then use that algorithm, you can see it contributes to clean water and sanitation. It could also contribute to responsible consumption and production. And by doing this, and doing this for a large set of firms and a large set of firms' actions, we then link that to industrial sectors and trade data to better understand how different sectors of the economy are contributing to different sustainable development goals. So that's very briefly in summary, and it is more technical, but I don't want to go into the whole technical discussion of this, of course. So what we can...
Dirk, sorry to interrupt you. Could you please adjust the display of your slides, because we can see your slide not in full screen.
Yes, you're absolutely sure. Yeah, fine.
Sorry for interrupting. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, here we go.
Perfect.
So if we then do that and we look at the different sets of sustainable development goals, we see that firms in their core economic activities, at least what their business are mainly contributing to a goal. So particularly number 9, which is innovation, industry and infrastructure, very strongly as well to areas like sustainable cities, strongly as well, of course, to decent work and economic growth, health as well, and responsible consumption. Not very strongly at all, at least in their core activities, to things like SDG 5, which is gender equality, but also to life below water, which is SDG number 14. So we do see differences here, how at least through their core business activities, firms can contribute and are contributing to different sustainable development goals. We can also go a little bit further, because their firms have a direct role in terms of their direct impact to business. They also play an indirect role, which is basically how they are contributing to different sectors of the economy, because many firms basically deliver goods and services as well to other sectors of the economy, and therefore they also have an indirect impact. And we've measured that by looking at input-output tables, where we can then basically get to that indirect contribution. And it basically shows that some of the sectors that were already contributing quite highly to the direct contribution make even more of an impact, or have even a higher share of their contribution to total value added. So we see again that as the 9, 11, 8, and 12 are amongst those where contribution is quite large. The third dimension, which we looked at in this as well, is looking at the international side of this, because of course firms also trade, they export, and we know that in many cases firms also can contribute to value creation in different countries. And here you see the light blue part, which is foreign value added, where again firms can make a large contribution to supporting SDG related activities in different countries. And of course, smaller economies, typically there's a larger contribution of that foreign value added than there would be in large economies like the United States and Japan. The main point here is basically there are these different channels through which firms can contribute to the Sustainable Development Goal, directly, indirectly, that we need to keep in mind. Obviously, firms don't only contribute to the Sustainable Development Goals directly. They also, and we see that often in surveys, indirectly, they can also have an impact. For instance, in areas like gender equality and climate action, those are things where a lot of firms say, we care about these things, we think they're important. However, they're not often, they're indirectly sort of the target of business activity. So they're not core to what businesses are doing. They're more sort of the things that businesses are trying to achieve through other types of actions in a lot of what they are doing. So I think it is important to keep those two dimensions in mind. So let me go a little bit to perhaps what we are looking at to some of the policy issues here. Of course, we know there are many obstacles to firms becoming sustainable. We often need strong commitments from firms in terms of their leadership. We need to demonstrate the business case, which can be difficult. We need to adopt the business model, adapt it to circular economy, for instance. We need to engage with customers to try and sort of make this difference. And I think in many cases, this is still difficult to achieve because the link between sustainability and financial performance often remains a little unclear, which is, I think is a difficulty. And actually, last week, we released a report at the OECD showing, for instance, that gender diversity and also cultural diversity are quite important for productivity of a firm. So basically, we show that link between certain sustainable development goals and corporate performance, which is important. Now, this difficulty, I think particularly, and I think Ambassador Kumura raised it already in the beginning, raises important difficulties for SMEs, because when we looked a little bit at the data coming from the UN Global Compact survey, we could see that large firms were much more likely to take action on some of the SDGs than small firms. So basically, you see here the ratio of likelihood of very large firms versus very small firms taking action. And you see, of course, that in certain areas like climate action, but also others, there is a very large difference between large firms and small firms in their likelihood to take climate action. So let me go to the end briefly and say something about policies and the link to industrial policy. I think we also did a survey of a number of countries looking at the policy instruments that they are using to target the SDGs. We see different types of policies in place here, rewards and incentives. Think about carbon pricing, for instance, government support measures, already mentioned by Director General of METI, and also mandatory compliance. Think about regulations and standards. Lots of differences here, and governments in practice use a range of these tools. I think from the perspective of looking at policies, industrial policies can play an important role here because they are very much targeted at firms. They're trying to support firms in moving in a certain direction. We need the broader framework policies as well, but we also need rewards, assistance, and incentives to support the contribution of firms to the SDGs. And we've looked at a number of examples in the report in terms of innovation subsidies, SDG awards, support for firms in terms of SMEs, startups, again mentioned already in the beginning, but also issues related to how we develop the market in this area. For instance, how we can increase the market size for sustainable products by trade policies, public procurement, standard setting, and so on to help in this area. Finally, I think governance in many cases is key here. We need a broad policy to really sort of implement the sustainable development goals. They need to be inclusive. I think if we see that SMEs are still lagging, it is important to bring these firms along. We need good framework policies. We need good competition policies. It is really a question of bringing quite a number of policies together, but there is an important role for these industrial policies as well, I think, for countries to think a little bit more about, which is, I think, the main point of the report that we're talking about today. So let me end here and thank you very much for your attention. You can find the report, or at least the policy note, online already. The main report will still take a little bit longer to be put out, which has all the details that I couldn't talk about in the short presentation. So let me end here and thank you for any questions later.
Thanks a lot, Dirk, for your interesting presentation, which gives us hope. I'm an optimistic person by nature, and whenever there are obstacles, I also see the potential for solutions. And it's very encouraging to see that firms are investing in sustainability and SDGs, notwithstanding the challenges they face. Please let me remind the audience that you will have the opportunity to ask questions to Mr. Pilat after the panel discussion, which is coming up right now. With our panelists, we will have the opportunity to come back to some of the points raised by Mr. Pilat's presentation. and we will discuss the main issues explained during this presentation. It's clear that we are at a turning point and that action is needed if we collectively want to reach the objectives of the SDGs and the Paris Agreement. As I mentioned, it's very encouraging to learn that firms are accelerating their initiatives towards the attainment of the SDGs. Some firms are drastically changing their business models and or simply investing in more ESG initiatives. And you mentioned, Dirk, that it's difficult to connect sustainability with firm performance, but there are some recent studies that are very reassuring because they show that companies that are investing in sustainability enjoy several advantages in terms, for example, of cost of capital, but also of customer loyalty, which has, of course, an impact on the profitability of companies. And there are studies showing that sustainability makes firms more resilient in the face of crisis, which reinforces the message basically that sustainability is not a cost, but it's rather an investment. But the vast majority of firms are struggling, having to face the digital and sustainable transition in the midst of one of the biggest economic crises we ever experienced. And unfortunately, in only a brief period of time, the COVID-19 has disrupted efforts to achieve the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. And the crisis has, of course, affected the liquidity buffers of firms and therefore their investment capacity. As the OECD study suggests, the challenges we currently face require a whole of government approach and the use of a wide range of policy instruments to accompany firms in this transition. Beside large-scale investments from the private sector, as we learned, also public impetus is needed. So the objective of this panel is to understand what are the factors that hinder or, on the contrary, enable firms to embark on a sustainability journey. And why? Because understanding these factors, of course, allows to design better policies and addressing potential existing bottlenecks and to use the right policy levers. To discuss these topics, we have the pleasure to host two distinguished panelists. Her Excellency, Ms. Pilar Garrido, Minister of National Planning and Economic Policy, Costa Rica. Costa Rica is the newest OECD member since 2021 and is a country with a very active policy reform agenda and a high degree of commitment to implement the SDGs. We also have the pleasure to host Mr. Richard Baldwin, Head of the Investment Research Branch and Enterprise Branch, UNCTAD. Many thanks for being with us today. Given the topics I would like to discuss, I will start from Mr. Baldwin. And the first question I have is about the role of the private sector in achieving the SDGs and what are the obstacles that firms face in maximizing their impact, especially given your expertise, Mr. Baldwin. I would like to ask you what is the role of global value chains and international trade and investment in transmitting the impact of the private sector across borders.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the nice introduction. That's quite a number of questions you have there. So the role of firms in achieving the SDGs, obstacles they face, and then the role of GVCs or global value chains. I very much like the presentation that Mr. Pilat made earlier, which connected all these elements and really put it in the sphere of international trade and investment, global value chains, international production networks. So I'll try to frame my answer to your questions in that way as well. Of course, coming from the UNCTAD Investment and Enterprise Division, the first angle that I would use to look at this is the contribution that firms can make to the financing or investment gap in the SDGs. I heard Ambassador Komura refer to the 2.5 trillion investment gap in the SDGs in developing countries. That number came from the 2014 World Investment Report, where we first look at this on the eve of the adoption of the SDGs. Since then, the UN General Assembly asked us to continue monitoring investment in the SDGs, and we launched, actually during this high-level political forum 2 years ago, we launched the SDG Investment Trends Monitor. That first edition of the Investment Trends Monitor showed that since the adoption of the SDGs 6 years ago, some progress was made. But our latest iteration, of course, in our latest World Investment Report, shows that much of that progress since 2015 in promoting investment in SDGs has been undone as a result of the crisis last year. So, in answer to your question, what are the big obstacles that firms face? Well, first answer is, of course, the crisis we are facing today and the effect it has had on investment in SDG relevant sectors. The presentation I just heard made a very clear distinction between what firms can contribute through their core business and what they contribute indirectly, or rather what they contribute by what they do versus what they contribute to through how they do it, right? That's what I picked up in the presentation. So what they do is very much linked to the actual investment areas that firms invest in, right? How they do it, that's a different story. So it's in the context of GVCs, I think that probably over the past, well, decades, we have looked much more at how firms behave in international production networks, how they operate in foreign countries, than at what they actually do and what they contribute, right? The what they contribute has been mostly focusing on the economic angle, the employment generation, the trade generation. So it's not so much focused on the investment in areas such as health, such as renewable energy, such as infrastructure building. So I think there's been over the past few years or over the past decades a bit of a mismatch, and I think we're repairing that now. We're looking much more at the actual concrete investment and operational areas of firms and what that does to the contribution, to their contribution on the SDGs. Now, then your question went to what are the obstacles. So I'll try and round up quickly to not speak too much. But if I think about that, one is very clearly that while this is something that we all have to do, firms as much as households, as much as governments, so it's not really about obstacles, but there is clearly a cost involved, and you know, when I start talking about obstacles for firms, that's the first area I would start at. Maybe a parallel I can draw there is in the current discussion on making supply chains, global value chains or global supply chains more resilient. And the big discussion right now is, will firms really do it on their own, or will they need incentives or regulations to make them do it? And clearly that whole discussion is around the sunk cost involved in international production networks. And very often it is just far too expensive to restructure international production networks. And firms will look for any other type of lower cost option to make supply chains more resilient. So I think this is one of the obstacles. A second one is, to me, the differential speeds of implementation in different countries of rules, regulations, and policy frameworks around sustainability, right? An example there could be the well, the European Green Deal. I believe there is a new publication of the Green Deal package coming out next week. And there's a big discussion there on the need to introduce carbon border adjustments. What this does is, in effect, it acknowledges that countries in different regions of the world are implementing measures at differential speeds that introduces uncertainty for firms, but also through these type of mechanisms where we're trying to create a level playing field for firms around the world, we are adding to potential trade and investment barriers in an environment where the global climate for trade and investment is already much less conducive than it was in a decade ago. And finally, just to conclude my answer is, so the first one was cost, the second was differential speeds of implementation. The third one to me is, how do firms report on their impact? How can they actually measure it, right? And this is an area where UNCTAD, of course, also does a lot of work through our secretariat role for the expert body, ECOSOC expert body on international standards for accounting and reporting. There is simply at this moment not yet a consensus framework globally for reporting on sustainability impact. There are some big steps being made right now. For example, the discussion in the IFRS Foundation on the introduction of a sustainability standards board is a big step forward. Again, the EU taxonomy on sustainable impact or on sustainability investing is a big area, because often these kind of EU initiatives are being taken up around the world. But I would think those are factors that firms around the world, investors around the world have to deal with. With that, I hope I have given a complex answer to your complex set of questions. I'm open to further questions later.
Thanks a lot, Richard. I wanted to profit from your expertise, your presence, to ask a very articulated question. And I'm very happy you brought about also the topic about sustainability reporting and disclosure, because I work a lot in that area, and I think you are totally right on that point. Let me remind the audience that if you would like to ask a question, you can use the raise hand button and book your question for the end of the panel. Now, I would like to ask a question to Minister Pilar Garrido, because with Mr. Baldwin, we talked about global, let's say, companies, international companies, large businesses, and I would like now to, let's say, tackle the angle and take the perspective of smaller companies, of smaller firms. And I would like to ask the Minister, what are the main obstacles for Costa Rican SMEs contributing to the SDGs, and to what extent these obstacles, these challenges are different from those that larger businesses face?
Good morning. It is a pleasure for us to be with you this morning. When it comes to SMEs, it's actually more complicated to manage their contribution and to map their contribution to sustainable development goals. It has been a little bit more complicated since reporting requires institutional planning and accountability process, which demand time and resources for some SMEs that are not available or as available as when it comes to bigger firms. So they're not much encouraged to report and set a deeper implementation strategy because they're struggling with other core business activities. What we have thought about is on the alternative that they could report and agree on goals and targets at an aggregate level. So for instance, local chambers and branches of activities, they could report in that sense so that it is easier to agree on impact measures and make it easier for them to report. This come into their direct contribution and the reporting instrument in that indicator of the 12.6.1 of number of companies that publish and that sets their sustainability reports. and at the same time, on more deeper senses on how their core businesses are aligned to SDGs activities. Well, what we've seen is that they struggle a lot in terms of, and because of the pandemic, they struggle even more because they have been, most of them, severely hit by the pandemic. So they have, they need to work harder in terms of having the resources available, and at the other level, they don't have as much resources to invest in terms of innovation. So what we have been thinking is what can the government do in order to set the right incentives to foster that innovation ecosystem and to help them transform their core business into more sustainable ones in those cases that are not fully aligned with SDGs. And this we have been doing. We have some examples of getting SMEs and sustainable strategies. So for example, we have NAMA cattle and crops that help business to turn their whole production as a whole into more lower water, lower land, and lower pesticides, to make that more technology based in terms of agriculture, and to bring them together in order to meet a profit and sustainability. This is an example of NAMA cattle and NAMA coffee, which are one of the greatest advances. Also, we have, in terms of people and measuring the people that work in SMEs, we have run with the private sector a multidimensional poverty index for people that work in companies. And so we have managed to map out also where there are multidimensional vulnerabilities that can be addressed, so that they can also invest in their people and their talent, address some of their challenges, work with the government in that process, and at the same time transform their core business to make it more aligned into having bigger outcomes with a smaller investment and make them sustainable, so that they can actually contribute with this economy we're looking to consolidate, that is decentralized, that activates economic space, that is decarbonized, and that at the same time is digitalized. We have also been working with them, if I may add, I'm sorry to take much time than I was supposed to, but something that it is very important for us is also having the right resources for them, and working with some development banks, and working with this whole system that is called Banca para el Desarrollo, development banking system that is for SMEs as well. It's oriented towards them in order to have the right financing and the right tools, so that they can accomplish their where they have weaknesses, and also foster this innovation ecosystem and accompany them in the process. This is sort of what we have been looking at.
Thanks a lot. And if I may, a follow-up question, because you already mentioned that in your answer. What is the role of the companies in this economic development strategy of Costa Rica? How are you working with companies? What is your collaboration with companies?
In the process, well, we have two processes. One that is linked with SDGs that have this milestone in 2030. But at the same time, we have this other process that is linked to our long-term decarbonized strategy in 2050. And we engage with companies in both levels. So when it comes to SDGs in particularly, we have been working with them ever since every voluntary national review, and we have set like 3 entry points, and based on those 3 entry points, we have been engaging with companies in different ways. So for instance, when it comes to poverty and equality, it showed us this that I was saying about addressing the needs of the employees, that is crucial for business continuity and improvement, and for productivity, you know, that having employees that are well engaged and that are more productive. Also investing in communities where their core activities are located. This has more to do with social investment and the impact of the core business in the community, and coordination and advocacy for reforms and policy improvements. In the other entry point, which is sustainable consumption and production, we have seen a lot of commitment from both from private programs and private companies for certifications. We have had 400 private sector organizations that received Blue Flag Award, and because they reduce their parameters such as water consumption and electricity consumption, and they increase sustainable purchases and decreased wastes. Something else is the business eco-efficiency program for private companies to manage their environmental aspects and impact in order to achieve their ecological Blue Flag Award. So we have around 200 companies that have participated in reducing significant reductions for around 3,000 tons of CO2 as a consequence of decreasing on electricity consumption, 50,000 tons of CO2 by reducing fossil fuels, and 2,000 million square meters of savings in water. And also nearly 600 tons of reduction in paper consumption, just to give you an example. I agree with the presentation given by our colleague from the OECD that said that also when it comes to the major contributions of companies, you can actually see them in that SDG number 9, which is linked to infrastructure, and resilient infrastructure has been some of the where we have seen a lot of contributions from the private sector as well in terms of sustainable construction materials, sharing good practices among construction businesses and resilience, governance, innovation, and so this is one of the key aspects. We also believe, and the private sector has been really keen into working with us with our also National Statistics Institute when it comes to reporting, because you know you can do it, but then you have to have the right metrics in order to measure it well, in order to improve and do it with the state. So doing it in a joint process, in a joint ecosystem of sustainability. So with this shared accountability on SDGs indicators, we have addressed the possible route to go deeper into monitoring. And so we're currently piloting this that is called the Cross Data Partnership, which is a monitoring platform that seeks to display the contribution from non-state stakeholders, to the SDGs. And so private sector is leading this process and has been one of the most enthusiastic implementers. We still have a lot of challenges to find the right incentives in a constrained fiscal situation that has been more difficult because of that pandemic. But even though we have, with what we have now, we have been trying to push forward innovation and to push areas where policy evaluation and also regular adjustment in terms of metrics and analysis and joint work are very strategic for us to encourage businesses to report on SDGs, deal with their information better, and also contribute better as a whole, with a whole of state perspective and a whole of society perspective to this goal that we have to transform our productive matrix to have more resilient economic activities, more digitalized, more decarbonized, and of course to have more jobs available for better lives for our people that have been struggling a lot. So basically that's it.
Thanks a lot. Your words are very inspiring. I liked the fact that you brought this idea of ecosystem, which really is an idea that stresses the fact that several actors are involved in this effort, and we need the commitment and the collaboration of all of them. Since I don't see any question coming up in the chat, neither from the raise your hand button, I would like to ask a follow-up question to Mr. Baldwin. And I would like to stay on the policy level, let's say, perspective. So taking the perspective of the policymakers. You already talked a bit about that, but since we just said that it is a collaborative effort, I would like to ask you what are the challenges that policymakers face in engaging the private sector and in maximizing the contribution of firms to the sustainability transition, and if you can give us some concrete examples and policy options. I'm looking at the time, so Richard, I'm sorry, I need to ask you to be quite quick. I know it's another big question, but I would like to leave 5 minutes for the final remarks by His Excellency, Mr. Rodrigo Carazo.
Sure, I'll try to be quick. So the challenges for policymakers, I mean, I think Minister Garrido already touched upon a few, and one that she mentioned was the difficulty sometimes of measuring progress and of measuring the state of play, basically. I think this is something we encounter a lot. Finding out what is the progress being made at country level by firms is very difficult, because aggregating reports by individual firms is near impossible. We are, of course, in UNCTAD helping countries with SDG indicator 12.6 on the number of companies reporting on sustainability. And I already mentioned what is happening at firm level, right? The developments that are taking place there. I think in addition to a challenge, it is also a huge opportunity, because what we reported in our latest World Investment Report is that there is some $3.2 trillion of funds on global financial markets looking for investment in firms that report on ESG performance. So it is a challenge and an opportunity at the same time. Looking at some concrete examples, I liked very much the link in the document that Mr. Pilat presented with industrial policy, of course. It's something we also look at on a regular basis. And I think that now with the post-pandemic recovery investment packages that are being adopted around the world, there's already some 3.5 trillion in actual investment packages being formulated as part of course, the much bigger sort of fiscal outlays of around 16 trillion that have gone towards the rescue effort. But this is really about investment in building back better, basically, over the next couple of years. And that's, of course, nothing else than industrial policy for recovery, right? Concrete examples, well, we've tried to give a few options in our recent work. One is, for example, well, investment promotion as efforts in SDG investment sectors. So traditional industrial policy has gone very much towards value chains, global supply chains, participating in global value chains through attracting what's called efficiency seeking in foreign direct investment in, well, typical sectors are electronics, automotive, and those things. But attracting investment in SDG sector is much more about attracting infrastructure investment, attracting investment in renewable energy, attracting investment in health sectors, etc. So that's a shift in industrial policy right there. A tool for that would be, for example, special economic zones. We have launched this model SDG zone to help countries find ideas for promoting SDG relevant investment through special economic zones. And another area as part of industrial policy tools, of course, is investment incentives, which have traditionally, of course, very much focused on, well, employment generating investment, and those kind of incentives could be rebuilt or repurposed for attracting investment in SDG sectors. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Richard, for being so clear, so comprehensive in such a small amount of time. Let me thank the panelists and the presenter for this very inspiring discussion. And now I would like to give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Rodrigo Carazo, Permanent Representative of Costa Rica to the United Nations, for his closing remarks. Thanks a lot.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much for the presentation, and thanks to Japan for having invited Costa Rica to co-sponsor with them this interesting event. As a new entry into the OECD, we definitely need these spaces in order to learn, in order to incorporate ourselves into the work of the organization, give our viewpoints, which, as you have heard from our Minister Pilar Garrido, are definitely appropriate and definitely forward-looking. if you want to have advances in all these purposes in attainment of SDGs, put women at the helm and put young women at the helm, and we'll get half of the work done. Then they'll have to work about 18 hours a day, and there's no problem if they're young enough to do so. Thanks for this invitation, and thanks for this policy note, which we have written and heard this morning, which gives a light into some of the things that may be done, into some of the current circumstances. One of the issues that attract my attention is the ample possibility to get SEMs, small and mid SMEs, small and medium enterprises, into the action. They are the larger, and Mr. Pilat did not mention one of the charts in that study, which gives me the opportunity to do so, is the fact that the small and medium enterprises are lagging behind the big ones in implementing industrial processes, looking towards the fulfillment of the needs to complete the SDGs by the year 2030. But well, thanks, Richard Baldwin. I mean, you mentioned that there is an investment gap of $2.3 million, excuse me, $2.5 trillion. Let me see if I quote you right. And then afterwards, you mentioned the fact that there is an amount of $3.2 trillion looking for investment. So let's just put the dots together and see that those enormous amounts of money, surplus money, that have given the opportunity to some of the countries to inject the stimulus into their economies and to the peoples, have that part of that excess funds go towards the places where fiscal space is needed in order to advance changes in industry, changes in looking to the fulfillment of SDGs. As large transfer of resources, Marshall Plan is not an invention, it's not a dream, it was a reality some time ago. Why not look into something like that, in which that excess liquidity of the North could be used exclusively, with no other condition that want to attain the SDGs, in which we are lagging even more with the pandemics. Let me underline some of those issues that the young leaders such as Minister Pilar Garrido have put in action. And let me underline one of the facts that she mentioned, and that is one that we need to stress even more in a country, which is the connection with the communities. I mean, people who work in the enterprises, people who vote in elections, people who need to have their SDGs fulfilled, are all to be found in the communities. So let's try to make those links in the places where they live, in the places where they interact. And let's keep on doing always on a people-centered basis. Just the final word, I'm very happy not only with the victories of Argentina and Italy over the weekend, but also with the muy bien, and also with the achievement in Venice over the weekend. I mean, steps towards new tax structures in the world that will precisely permit to have more resources dedicated to what is needed for the whole world community, which is the attainment of SDGs. Well, thank you very, very much. And thanks for the opportunity to share with the OECD partners, of which we are proudly one of them now.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Carazo. What a great conclusion. Before I close the meeting, I would like to remind everyone that you can find the policy note online, and the recordings of the event will be available soon. Thanks to all of you, to the distinguished speakers, and to the participants. It has been really a very inspiring meeting, which will contribute to build momentum on SDGs. Thanks a lot.
Adios.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye.
Bye.
Adios. Adios, ministra.
Hasta luego. Que estén muy bien.
Very much.
Thank you,
Thank you.
dear ambassador.
Thank you,